Good evening, everyone. It is beautiful to be here today, not only because we will talk about this book that Jungianeum's book has just released or reissued. Who's the Patient here? Portraits of the Young Psychotherapist. But for me, it is so beautiful to be here with a legend, Dr. Thomas Singer. We know him as Tom. Tom, shall I really read your biography? Because people know about you, right? So, we are here to talk about your book. We are here to talk about politics, obviously. What else with you? Let's start from this book. I received my copy yesterday. Your copy is on your way, possibly is over the ocean. This book, actually, this book, which is the original one, published in 1975 by Oxford Press, is older than me because I'm 47. So, can you tell me how it started? How you and Stuart Coppens started the work? Because it's not just a book of words, it is actually also a cartoon. And the original copy was The Face of Man. Well, we were chit-chatting before this. You pointed out that I changed the copy, and we live in through difficult times. So I decided to take a cartoon that is about a man having therapy sitting on a toilet. So, shall we start from the beginning? What inspired you and Stuart to work on this book that was published almost 50 years ago?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Stefano. I'm enormously grateful to you for picking up on this book, which, as you said, was actually published 50 years ago. And it feels so old that it either feels from another lifetime or I wonder who did it. I hardly recognize it. At the same time, it seems enormously familiar. It's one of those strange kind of memories that's both uh, like yesterday and like another lifetime. And anyway, very grateful to you for picking this up. I was rereading it last night and today, and I was kind of amazed at the book for a variety of reasons. I was surprised, and so much of it seemed familiar, and I felt in some ways like I was still learning the lessons that Stuart and I were trying to portray 50 years ago. Uh, there is an interesting story to how this book came into being. Stewart had gone to medical school on the East Coast at Harvard and was going to take a child fellowship at Dartmouth, which is in New Hampshire, Hanover, New Hampshire, which was a relatively small department of psychiatry at the time. And I had in 71, or 72, I had done part of my residency at Dartmouth, and I didn't like modern clinical psychiatry, and I was very interested in Jung. I had begun a Jungian analysis when I had a terrible time in medical school, and I had seen a Jungian named Margit Frank in the mid 60s. She sort of rescued me. So I I was doing a mainstream psychiatric residency. There weren't a lot of different avenues to getting into psychotherapy at that time, and so I had had a Jungian analysis in the 67 to maybe 70, and then I'd gone out to California and begun my residency there. I was all over the map, literally at that time. I was caught between the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States, and I had grown up in the middle of the country in St. Louis, Missouri. So I was sort of a citizen of a number of different parts of this country. Anyway, I had not finished my residency at Dartmouth. I had gone back to California and begun at the Jung Institute in San Francisco in 73, I think it was. So I already was pretty steeped in the Jungian tradition. But since I hadn't completed my psychiatric residency, I felt like I was an imposter or that I wasn't truly credentialed. So I contacted the director of training at Dartmouth. I had done a couple of years there and asked if I could come back and complete my residency. So I'd done 2 years at the Jung Institute and a year or two of my residency, and they accepted me for a child fellowship, a child psychiatry fellowship at Dartmouth in 1975. And that's when I met Stuart Copans, and the two of us were child fellows, fellows in child psychiatry, and our the head of the very small department was a man named Ray Sobel, who was a trained at the William Allenson White Institute in New York, which was the in the tradition of Harry Stack Sullivan. So it was the interpersonal. Today, it would be the inheritors of that tradition would be the relational analyst, I would say. So Ray was a child analyst trained in the Harry Stack Sullivan, William Allenson White tradition, and Stu and I were his child fellows. And Stu and I really hit it off. We liked one another. We had fun. Stu loved to do cartoons, and I had lots of ideas, although I was firmly entrenched in the Jungian tradition by that point. And Ray was a great supervisor, and so we started telling stories to one another, Stu and I, about training. I sort of already had a Jungian perspective. Stuart had a more Freudian, traditional Freudian perspective. And Ray Sobel had this sort of Sullivanian, and these were all separate, really separate traditions. And so we met weekly, and Stu and I started having images, and Stu was a really good cartoonist, so he started drawing my images, and he had good ideas, and I started writing his ideas. So we had this really synergistic collaboration between images and ideas, the Freudian tradition, the Sullivanian tradition, the Jungian tradition. And for a year, we went every week, we would meet and tell stories. And this book grew out of our this child fellowship and our exchanging stories. And at the end of the year, we presented this cartoon guide, which we were really doing for our amusement and pleasure, and a way really of digesting the experience of learning how to be therapists. And we presented it at a small colloquium at Dartmouth. And then the director of the training program, a fellow named Gary Tucker, who was a wonderful mentor to me, uh, was very close with a fellow, Jeff. What was Jeff's last name? One of the problems of age is you forget names. But anyway, Jeff was the editor for Oxford Press, and Gary had done books with him. And lo and behold, Gary sent this manuscript to Jeff at Oxford, and Oxford decided to publish it, which was just kind of a miracle at that time. Oxford was like the pinnacle of the pinnacle, and we were a couple of guys fooling around with images and cartoons and ideas about learning psychotherapy. So we were enormously lucky that they picked up on it, but to place it in a broader context, the America was in a kind of turmoil then that we haven't seen the likes of which until now. It was a time, it was really even though you weren't born, it was a cultural revolution. It wasn't just a cultural revolution in the United States, it was a cultural revolution around the world. And people who are old enough to remember the late 60s and early 70s will remember that this was a time of enormous transition and transformation and a kind of actually a great explosion and opening in culture. And so this book was kind of timely because in mainstream psychiatry, the Freudians had held all of the power for a long time in all of the major medical centers and universities of the United States. And it was just at the beginning when the biological tradition was starting to replace the Freudian tradition in the universities and the medical centers. And
Mhm.
the biological tradition was, of course, was psychopharmacology, basically. So the power in the training of psychotherapists and psychologists and psychiatrists was in rapid transition from a pretty strictly Freudian point of view to a much broader based opening to all sorts of traditions. I'd been in California, so there were many people who were sort of steeped in the Kundalini and many more esoteric traditions, and they were all sort of flooding the psyche at that time. So Stuart and I were resonating to all of this while we were doing our child fellowship, and this book is the result of that. That's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but it was a time of great cultural transition, and that was happening in psychiatry as well as in politics and in culture in general. So it's a very vital time, very exciting time.
You said you were in Jungian analysis. So the fact that you were a psychiatrist in training, not a psychoanalyst in training, when did you decide to train to become a Jungian psychoanalyst?
Well, I think I decided that maybe my third or fourth year in medical school, which would have been in the late 60s. I was a terrible medical student. I mean, I was really I wasn't well suited for it. One of the problems was that I had done all of my pre-medical, you had to take a lot of pre-medical courses, and I had done all of those courses in the early 60s, but I was much more interested in the humanities. I majored in European literature and religion at Princeton, and then I went and taught in Greece for a year. This is from in 65. So when I went to medical school in 66, I hadn't had a science course in 3 years. So I was way behind, and I never felt comfortable in the role of a regular physician, if you will. Fortunately, I met in the basement cafeteria a fellow named Ray. Oh my God, it's so bad. Uh, Ray Walker, who had been a stockbroker and had gone into a Jungian analysis with a very famous Jungian named Esther Harding, and decided to go to medical school. And I met him in the cafeteria, the basement of the Yale Medical School in 67. And he had come via a Jungian analysis to leave his job as a stockbroker. He was 35 years old, which was very old for a medical student. And I didn't know there was a Jungian tradition. I didn't know there was an ongoing Jungian tradition. I thought Jung had died and that was it. And Ray had been in an analysis. And so I ran into my own crisis in medical school, started to see a Jungian analyst. And I think by the late 60s, I had decided I wanted to be a Jungian analyst. And I had actually spent a couple of years in the training at the Jung Institute in San Francisco before going back and doing this residency. So I was already a pretty committed Jungian by that time. And what happens in the book is that it starts off with sort of the hero's journey. The hero is either a Freudian or a Jungian or somebody who wants to become a great analyst and a great savior and is well armored to go into the mental institutions and cure people. And that's sort of how the book starts with the young hero or heroine setting off in search of cures for mental illness. And then eventually the young hero gets swallowed up by the enormity of mental illness and mental processes, and all of the armors of the medical tradition and the psychiatric tradition start to fall away. And that's what this book is about, how the armored young hero gets taken apart by actually beginning to deal with patients for the first time. Yes, that's yes.
And, and your love hate for medicine is well described in the following words. Psychiatry is unlike regular medicine. If in medicine the urge is to understand the machinery of the organism, in psychiatry or psychotherapy, it is to gain a deep knowledge of human nature and behavior. And I believe that to become a Jungian, you really have to study the humanities first. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult. Actually, I didn't study medicine. And I remember I was 17, 18. It was the summer of my graduation, and I was talking to the priest that basically helped me to grow up, the one that scolded me when I was not following the rules, the one that had good words when I was lost. And he asked me, "What are you going to do next year?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I would like to become a psychoanalyst, but I don't know how." And he said, "Well, usually you study medicine, psychiatry." I said, "Oh, no, medicine with all that scientific subjects, I will simply not pass." And in fact, after a couple of mistakes, I started to study literature and philosophy. And for me, that was the thing. Tom, a very simple question. Who is Jung?
You froze, Stefano. Say the question again.
Who is Jung?
Well, the funny thing is, a Jungian, long ago, I stopped reading Jung, and I'm one of those Jungians who, for me, Jung is the person who rediscovered the reality of the inner life. And really, in the tradition of Meister Eckhart and Saint Augustine, I mean, there's a long tradition in the West of men and women who turned inward to discover themselves as opposed to living more out in the world, more extroverted attitude. So for me, the most important contribution of Jung was that he actually said that the inner world is real. Now, Jung's elaboration of his own inner world has become less interesting to me than the fact that he rediscovered and reaffirmed the deep value of the inner world and that he gave some basic parameters of that, like the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious and the archetypes. And so for me, he's somebody who rediscovered the reality of the inner world and created a basic roadmap for that. The specific contents of which I think each of us as individuals have to map for ourselves or discover for ourselves. So, so for me, Jung is the person who opened up the reality of the inner world and provided a basic map of that inner world. Now, Joseph Henderson added from the personal unconscious to the collective unconscious. He added the realm of the cultural unconscious, which has become extremely important to me. That's that mid place between the personal and the archetypal. For me, the cultural unconscious has become enormously alive. But as you were talking about the priest and literature in the humanities, I want to go back for a minute because the first thought that came to mind was the book by uh, George Bernanos, Diary of a Country Priest. Did you ever read that book, Diary of a Country Priest?
We'll do
Uh,
it soon.
well, it's a country priest who suffers deeply. I think and it's been years since I read it, who develops, I think, stomach cancer and he dies. And so it's a lonely, isolated man of deep spirituality who has a life-threatening illness and who, in the midst of that, has been trying to tend to his flock.
Mm.
And I read that more than 50 years ago, but as you were describing your own difficulties as a young man, as you were looking for things, that book came to mind. And I mention it because I happen to agree with you that I think as Jungians, we're probably best steeped in the humanities rather than in science and medicine. Um, Although the real challenge is to be able to balance something of the humanities and a scientific attitude. I think we need a bit of both.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, a month ago or two, I was part of an event organized by the Montreal Society, Jungian Society, which is not an official society of the IAP, but is an amazing, amazing group of really uh, Jung's lover. And Mari is here with us tonight. So I say hello to you, Mari. And on the panel, there was our dear James Hollis. And I put him like you and many other, Mary Watkins, Paul Young Eisner, as really as the new ancestor. But he said something that stayed with me. So I would like to double check with you how you feel about it. He said, to become a Jungian, you have to be someone in exile.
So in exile?
Exile, yeah.
Hmm. Well, first of all, I also participated in the Montreal Jungian Society, and I agree with you. I think they're doing some of the most exciting programming now of any organization, any Jungian group around the world. And Murray is terrific, and so I had a great experience with them too. I actually agree with you that it seems as though uh, the experience of being in exile is somehow essential to at least the beginnings of who we are. I think if you're totally comfortable in your culture of origin, it's less likely that you would be a Jungian. I think you need to experience something of being in exile. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and which is a wonderful old for the United States Midwestern town and city at that point. It was the fourth largest city in the United States before 1900. So it was a big city, and we made lots of shoes and lots of beer. And by the age of 17, although I grew up in a very comfortable, very prosperous and comfortable, really upper class family of that era, I was reading Camus at the age of 18. Now, what's a 17-year-old in the late 1950s doing reading The Stranger and The Plague? You know, how did I end up there? I don't know how I ended up there, but I ended up being in exile from this
Yeah.
very comfortable, prosperous, fine, old Midwestern American city. So, so my own personal experience is that exile seems to be an important part of who we are. And I think most of the people I know have had that experience. Most of the Jungians I know. Uh, I agree with you.
Tom, the title of the book is Who's the Patient Here? But the subtitle is Portrait of the Young Psychotherapist. I remember when you and I first met, it was August 2019 in Vienna, and I asked you to interview you. You gently agreed. Many things stuck in my mind, but one thing was until I was 60, I felt I had nothing to add. I felt I had nothing to write. And well, since you were 60, you contributed so much. And we are all grateful to your work and especially cultural complexes and what you do now. But before we get into your own work, what would you say to the young therapist of today, of 2025, the one in training, the ones that would like to train, the one that just, because there are many students online tonight, there are many recent graduates of whatever age, because we know that you can become a Jungian at any age. What would you say to them? Those in training right now, those that would like to train?
Well, it's a really good question to which I don't have a, a quick or easy answer. I guess I can speak from my own experience that, as you remember, and I'm quite surprised that you remember so well, I was at an institute, a very fine institute where Joseph Henderson and Joseph Wheelwright and Kay Bradway and John Perry. These were some of my giants. And I really didn't. I thought, first of all, that as a Jungian, you didn't have anything to say until the second half of life. That's sort of what we were trained, that individuation was a second half of life process. And so you really didn't have anything to offer until you were at least 40, but maybe down that would be 50 or 60. I mean, that was sort of that's kind of how you felt. And then when you're surrounded by giants, you do feel as if they know and have written about or explored everything that there is to know about life and about individuation. And so I certainly picked up that feeling that I had nothing new to contribute. It really wasn't until I started to discover my own voice, which was not till I was 60. Not that I didn't have my own voice before that, but that I had something to say. And I guess what I would say is don't try to say something before you have something to say. In other words, wait until there's something that comes to you that is really that you can't not say, that you have to explore, and that I talk to people all the time who wonder how I got energy or passion for things, and they sort of go through their life without. Well, I don't think it's until you dive into yourself, and maybe if you're lucky, something comes up from inside that just grabs you and you have to go into it. That's when I would start saying something, and that's what I would start writing, whether you're 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60, whenever it happens. I mean, somebody like James Baldwin, the great black American, he had something to say at 20 and 30. But a lot of us don't really have anything that's really ours until we're older. So to the younger people, my advice would be don't worry if you don't have an original voice. If you do, give expression to it in whatever way you can. And if you don't, wait for it to come because I think it will come. So
And
it's
if it
not an age-related thing necessarily.
Yeah, yeah. And if it doesn't come, it's okay. We'll find another way. I was in Rome, as I said recently, and I went there because I was invited to speak at Italian Jungian Society, and my nephew was there as well. He asked me, "What is your job?" And I want to tease him. I said, "My job today is to tell a lot of things but say nothing." And he looked at me and said, "You have a strange job." But also because, I've published a couple of things, and I think I'm in that phase now that is, what's next? It's not about publishing more, but it's publishing something that is really meaningful to you, to you. So it's something that speaks to you. Tom, what is the relevance of analytical psychology today?
Well, uh, I guess I guess I should speak my own voice. I mean, there are a lot of Jungians who do great work seeing individuals and helping individuals come to grips with their own inner life and their adaptation to the world. And that's always been at the center of our work, and I still think it is the most important thing that we do is working with individuals and doing the best we can to be responsive to them and help them find their way, uh, or at least if they're suffering uselessly. A lot of people suffer uselessly. I mean, their suffering is useless. I think there's a difference between meaningful suffering and useless suffering. So one of the things I think we do is help people not suffer uselessly and suffer meaningfully. Um, for me, over the last 10 or 20 years, that clinical work has continued. But the most important thing that I feel I've been doing in my non-clinical work has been trying to address the the interface of the collective psyche and the cultural psyche, if you will, and how it lives inside of us, so that the realm of the cultural complex as it lives both out in the world and inside of us has been, for me, the cutting edge of exploration. It's actually been in some ways more interesting to me than my individual psyche. Uh,
Mm.
but that's just what's happened to me over the last 20 years or so. I continue, I think I've been in some form of therapy or analysis for the last 50 years or more. And so I continue my own individual work. And I'm always surprised that when I think I'm done, something else comes up and I'm back trying to thrash through personal complexes and issues. But the cutting edge for me in terms of my professional work, I think, has been in the realm of the uh, collective psyche and cultural complexes. Obviously, that's not for every Jungian. So when I think what the contribution of analytical psychology is today, my contribution has been in the realm of exploring what Henderson called the cultural unconscious and cultural complexes, because I think that's actually what's tearing us apart as a civilization. And
Mhm.
to the extent that we have a responsibility to the ongoing life of civilization, uh, I think that that's what the area that's interested me the most.
Yeah. Double question because, okay, you said until you were 60, you were there listening, working, and then you revolutionized analytical psychology, bringing the concept of cultural complexes to the world. How did you start? How did it start? When? Why?
Well, um, I was working with Sam Kimballs, who really is a co-founder with me of this notion. And I think I was meeting with Sam one day and we were talking about complexes, and he used the word cultural complex. And a bell went off inside. I had been wrestling with the interface of mythology, politics, and psyche. Those were what's the relationship between mythology and the psyche and politics? And Sam used the phrase cultural complex, and it's as if it all came together as the interface of mythology, politics, and psyche. And the reason that actually the personal reason that it became so important to me goes back to this: who's the patient here? Uh, when I was training, I got very interested in Jung. That's Jung spoke to me because of his interest in the spiritual life and the religious traditions, and that it had a positive role to play in the psyche. And for Freud, religion really was the opiate of the people, or the opiate. And so I got very interested in Jung, and uh, both of my parents, they were of German Jewish heritage. Their ancestors came to the United States in the 1840s. So by the time I was born, our family was very assimilated into American society. Both of them had had Freudian analysis. They both had serious problems to work on. And I got interested in Jung, and I had a big problem because my family was really in the Freudian tradition in terms of having received the benefits of a Freudian tradition. And I was interested in Jung. Was this some sort of authority problem? Was this what or whatever? So inside of me, there were these two traditions that were really competing. One was the Freudian, and one was the Jungian. And all the time I was thinking through training and afterwards, I was always kind of at war with myself about Jung and Freud and the Jung-Freud split. And when I got the notion with Sam of cultural complexes, suddenly I saw these two competing groups as being like huge balloons occupying far too much space in my psyche and in my brain. And the notion of cultural complex released all of the air in those cultural complexes, and the fights between Jungians and Freudians just suddenly they occupied a lot less space, because I was able to say, oh, these are cultural complexes. These two
Mhm.
traditions have become complexes, and we were at war because they're like two groups that fight, and then you feel like you're on one side or the other, and you have to choose one side or the other, which is ridiculous. So the cultural complex theory at a personal level helped defuse for me the internal battle between Jung and Freud,
That's
which
amazing.
occupied far too much of my psychic space.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Um, I'm asking you questions that I asked last summer at a plenary at the IAP conference to Verena Kast, Tom Kelly, and Karim Fleischer. And one of the questions I asked them, you were in the audience, I remember, I asked them, are we Jungians keeping up with the times or not?
Well, I can't speak for the Jungians. Um, uh, I mean, I can speak for myself as a Jungian that I think we're in danger of staying within our own little, what do you call it, silo. That's
Hmm.
that's the word that we have us. We have a language of our own, we have a deep tradition of our own, and when we get together, we speak our language and we carry on, and it's very meaningful to us. I brought a friend of mine, close friend of mine, who's been in the Gurdjieff movement for 50 years, and I brought him to a conference we just had at our Young Institute in San Francisco on politics just this last Saturday. And he stayed there all day and he listened very attentively. And I asked him what it was like. And he said, well, I really liked it a lot, but you all sure have your own language. And I didn't understand half the words you were using. And it was interesting to me and it was gripping. But so our biggest danger is that we become too insular, which we've always been insular because the Jungian tradition was always in exile, as you say. We were always the minority tradition. We were always seen as an esoteric or woolly-headed mystical tradition. And so we stayed under ourselves in many ways. So our biggest danger is staying unto ourselves, I think. Our biggest challenge is to meet the world as it is today. And that means, for instance, right now, I'm exploring artificial intelligence.
Yeah,
And with great interest, although I understand how people are deeply concerned about it and fearful of it, but I think we need to stay up with the times in terms of politics, in terms of philosophy, in terms of literature, in terms of social and political movements. We can't isolate and insulate ourselves, and that's our natural tendency.
yeah, I agree. And actually, I think you're really speaking for the young analyst, the one in training. And also, it's important, I believe, to, as you did, leaving the consulting group because the work you did in the past 20 years and the work about the psychosocial and the politics is really about that. But we also must change our language to ensure comprehensibility to lay people. Um, and maybe through these, I mean, we can keep talking internally in our niche with our words. But when we go out, we must uh, watch out because people don't understand and they might also get frustrated and irritated. But if we are able to become more comprehensible, analytical psychology might regain the initial revolutionary creed so dear to our founders. And look, for example, at what Jung did, being interviewed by the BBC and then the book that came out of that. He wanted people to understand what he was trying to say. Of course, in certain publication circles, he was using a specific language, but otherwise, we might become detached from the dayward claims of individuals. So, step out from the consulting room would be the focus for me. I stepped into the polis, answering the question of the 21st century. Otherwise, we might risk to becoming sterile inheritors of Jung. Sterile inheritors of Jung, and is not a very good looking thing, isn't it, Tom?
No, I remember when I was starting out as an analyst, I started to feel very isolated in my individual consulting office. And a friend of mine who worked for the United States government, the federal government, in disabilities claim, Social Security disabilities claim, they needed medical experts to come in and help administrative law judges determine who had mental illnesses that made them eligible to receive federal benefits. And he asked me if I would come into the courtroom as and testify as an independent medical expert about the nature of the mental illness and whether it meant the severity for which somebody would receive funding. And I ended up doing that for 20 or 25 years because I loved getting out of the office. I loved getting into a courtroom. I loved having an independent voice in which I tried to listen carefully to what the claimant who was applying for disability had to say, and then trying to come to some sort of decision or help the judge make a decision about mental disability. And in that context, I was exposed to so many things that I never would have seen in my office. There were boat people coming from Southeast Asia, from Indonesia. There were people coming from Cuba. There were all sorts of exiles coming into the United States. There were drug addicts. There were all the people that you wouldn't see in your office. And I loved being out in the world. It was like fresh air for me. And I do think we need to keep one foot in the consulting office and one foot out in the world, may be a way of saying it. And our language it's a big problem. My kids, when I start to talk young, they gave up listening to me a long time ago. I mean, they just don't listen to me. And the problem is Jung's basic insight about the reality of the psyche and of the inner world is still foreign to an
Yeah.
awful lot of people. And how we are able to translate out in the world that the inner world is real and of value and of meaning in a way that is comprehensible by those people for whom the the inner world is not real. I still think that's our most important. Um, that's the most important thing we have to contribute.
Yeah.
Is Yeah,
Go
go
on,
ahead.
go on.
No, that's why cultural complexes are so real to me because these complexes, they're not just out in the world, they live inside of us.
Mhm.
Whether it's a personal complex or a cultural complex with an archetypal core, however you want to frame it, it's the inner reality of it that moves us deeply and often unconsciously. And that's what we have to contribute. And
Yeah.
how we bring that into the world or mediate between that knowledge and the vicissitudes of everyday life in a very complex society, it's an extremely challenging.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. At the conference, I had a coffee and a chat with Sono Shandasani, that again is working on something amazing, that is retranslating and working on a critical edition of Jung's collective work. But apart from this, he told me that by statistic, by numbers, Jung's book sell 3 times more than Freud's or Freudian books. And this is not just, again, what you said before, the competition between Freudian and Jungians, who cares? But to me, it shows that especially in times like today, in times of crisis, Jung's voice is very relevant. Perhaps we could always say that Freud is perfect in time of ease, but in time of spiritual crisis, Jung's becomes much more interesting and relevant. And you can see these also in the arts, movies, plays, books, and not only because we just went through the 150th anniversary of Jung's birth, but there are many, many people that can engage with Jung not from a clinical point of view and basically say what we are not able to say to a wider audience. And this is fantastic. But at the same time, we also have to realize that we, the Jure Jungians, so those that have trained, are not the only one to own Jung, right? So it will be also a merge between us, the trained Jungians, and those that are knowledgeable about Jungians and that bring it to the world in a massive way. It would be very nice if we could meet and speak and maybe also be a little bit courageous. There are not many Jungians that write, for example, for newspapers on a daily or weekly basis, and it's a pity. Or magazine that reach a good number of people.
well, it's very challenging. I've been writing a so-called Substack. I don't know if Substack is something that's become popular
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Europe.
And your Substack is very famous within the
Well,
U.
well,
Yes.
I've been writing for a Substack for a year or so, and I've been having a ball. And of course, the challenge is to take what is very real to us about the inner world and how it's activated. I want to go back to what you said about Freud and Jung, and Jung being more relevant in some ways in times of crisis than Freud. Of course, Freud wrote Civilization and its discontents, so he was not uh, unaware of the problems of living in complex society. But I do think that first of all, Jung suffered enormously when he broke with Freud, and he was having those visions, and he was dreaming of blood coming over Europe, and he didn't know whether it was a personal psychosis or something in the collective psyche. So Jung did have a porousness to the collective psyche that was deeply influential, through which
Mm.
archetypal forces move. But the collective psyche, both prior to World War I and prior to World War II, Wotan comes to mind. Jung was porous to the collective psyche. He acknowledged its reality, and therefore, and he experienced the crisis of the 20th century internally in his own psyche. So I think that makes him, in some ways, more porous and vulnerable and accessible during times of crisis because he reported on his own vulnerability to that and because he actually postulated something called the collective psyche. I don't think Freud ever talked about a collective psyche per se. He talked about the individual psyche but I don't think civilization and its discontents. It's not that he wasn't in tune to those things, but I don't know if he made room for a so-called collective psyche. So I'm just thinking about you're saying Jung may be more relevant in times of crisis. It's
Yeah,
been
I say that because something that is very important to me, maybe because my Italian and Catholic background, but when you are hopeless and helpless, you have two choices:
mm,
cry
mm,
or pray.
mm,
And pray always in whatever in whichever way, also in non-religious way, is always linked to spirituality, which
mm,
is something that for me is not into Freud's civilization book, because that was not a psychoanalytic book, but was more a philosophical book, a book that extended beyond the clinical, while Wotan, and especially after the catastrophe, which is for me with Wotan the biggest paper. And we should all write before another catastrophe. We Jungians should be aware of something like that and write about before another catastrophe. Both papers or everything that Jung wrote was clinical per se, and also put him very much into a trouble. You know, when he was in Berlin and was talking about Nazism, and the positive and negative side of the swastika was misunderstood. So I lost my point, but anyway, it's about time to open. It's about time to open the floor to our audience, if you agree, Tom, because
yeah,
we'd love.
yeah. Thank you. Just yes, let's open it. And your questions are wonderful and stimulating, and I'm really enjoying this conversation a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. It's always a pleasure. So, who would like to ask a question to Tom Singer, or maybe even just bring a comment? You know, we're having our usual chit chat, but as always, Pater Otto is the first one. So go ahead.
Yeah, I am reminded of Tess Castleman's book, Threads, Knots, and Tapestries, where she talks about the tribal unconscious as a level between personal and collective. Are you familiar with her work, or would you compare your concept with hers?
I'm not familiar with her work, although tribal certainly would be quite consistent with cultural. Uh, um, I do think that the important point is that there's something in between our personal unconscious and the archetypal unconscious where culture is mediating our experience and we're identified in all sorts of ways with our specific culture. And whether you call it the cultural unconscious or the tribal unconscious, I think it's in the same zone. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with her work, but just on the basis of the language, I would say that it's in the same area.
Yeah, she bases it on dream groups that she led that started dreaming about each other, and some really funky coincidences that start to happen within the psychic field of a group.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense to me. In other words, it's not just the individual in relation to their own psyche and the archetypal. It's something in the group that has its own life. And I certainly believe in that, and we experience it all the time. I think we're so. I would agree. You know.
We have, I don't know who's first, Marjorie or Dennis. You decide who goes first. Dennis.
Oh, okay. Wow, wonderful interview. Tom and I think were in the Bay Area about the same time. I started graduate school in insect pathology in Berkeley, fall of 1967. I came into Jung through a pure science route. So your discussions about the humanities. And because of that, I realized what attracted me so much about Jung was the ecological nature of his work and his connection to the environment. I also, when I started training in Zurich, I realized my scientific side was was suffering there and had a dream about that. So my first talk I gave at a national conference in 1883 was Jungian Psychology and Science, a Strained Relationship. So that whole relationship to Apollo is really important. The other thing is, in terms of young people and the relevance of Jung's message, I more and more have been thinking about young people facing the environmental crisis. And I think Jung's connection with Taoism and nature is going to be very important. And particularly Vine Deloria Jr., this very well-known Native American writer, philosopher, saying Jungian psychology was the best way to approach the indigenous mindset because of dreams, synchronicities, and visions. I think the future for young people, especially with Jungian psychology, will be how we can address the environmental issues and the connection of the intrapsychic to that external world. To me, is the avenue is through kind of the indigenous worldview and a sacred sense of nature.
Oh, that's wonderful. Complementary and compensatory addition, because for you, the scientific mind was the natural mind that you inhabited. For me, the humanities was more the natural mind that I inhabited, although I love biology and science. My experience in medical school really alienated me from that. So I got driven over more to the humanities side of things. So thank you very much for bringing in that positive side of the scientific mind and how relevant it is today with regard to the interconnectedness of all of life, which sort of, in a funny way, the scientific mind at some point split us off from that, and Jung brought back in the fact that it doesn't have to be split off, something like that.
Thank you, Tom. Marjorie.
I'm asking myself whether at 76, Jungian analytic training is for me. I've been very interested in dreams most of my life, and I've written several books on twins. I'm also a Taoist and a Theosophist. And so I'm thinking at the end of life, is extremely important, because if we're going to be reincarnated, we better have some wisdom to bring with us in the causal body, in the and so I've been thinking about working with people at end of life, because I don't believe that the young are the only ones. I believe that we can carry wisdom over into the next lives. And so I'm just wondering what you think. If I've been a psychotherapist for many, many years, should I consider analytic training, or should I just go on as I am as a practiced, psychotherapist?
Well, I think at 76, what do I think? First of all, who am I to tell you what's best? I can give you an
Well,
opinion. I
yeah, I
think,
want an opinion. Mhm.
yeah, an opinion is that I think analytic training is very difficult and takes tremendous energy, and I would suspect that you're already so into it that I don't know whether a formal analytic training makes any sense. Not because you're too old, but because you have so much experience. I think analytic training, Stefano may have and others may have a very different opinion. I think you need to be relatively young, because it takes so much energy, and it's so demanding, and I think it sort of tears you apart. I'm not sure at 76 I'd want to be torn apart in the way that I think analytic training can tear you apart. What do you think, Stefano? I mean, I'm just shooting from the hip on this.
I agree. It's not about age. It's about, do you want to be teared apart? Do you want to be broken into pieces? And started training, you really started training at a very difficult time of your life, and for different reason. And maybe it's easier if you buy the book and read the book first before you think about it. But now, to make a joke, maybe more than the training is working in supervision with some Jungians, right? And here you have Tom, you have Pater Otto, you have Ruth Williams. And actually, there are many colleagues that are very experienced in their own field. And at some point, they decide to go for, let's say, supervision, so more informal, but is also important.
Thank
Good
you.
luck.
I
I
think
think
that's great. I think that's a great suggestion, that you can get your best Jungian training with a good supervisor, and you don't have to go the institutional route. I think what I'm thinking about is the institutional route. It's just you have to submit to all the institutional stuff if you're going into formal training. If you go into consultation with a good super Jungian, you'll get what you need. That's a great
Thank you.
idea.
Tom, maybe you agree with me, but the real training starts once you are graduated, right? Uh, I still benefit from supervision, and I remember Andrew Samuels telling me, after I graduated, I had supervision for 10 years. During the training, you study books because of the exams, but I mean, life is a training. Barbara.
Thank you. I started my training at 62. I finished at 69. And the very first time I called the LA Institute to ask about training and training prerequisites, the person on the other end of the phone didn't identify themselves, but their immediate response to my question was, "What is this self requiring of you?"
Hmm.
And I would offer that question. Thank you.
That's really good response. Thank you so much. That's a better way of going about it. Uh,
Thanks.
We have Rocky Ortega.
Well, thank you for calling on me. So I'm on the other side of the coin. I'm 78, and I'm my first year at the Zurich Institute. And I did not have a choice in the matter. Absolutely not. Um, I'm a semi-retired lawyer, and I found myself in a funk, heading downhill. I'm not feeling so good. I'm like, more depression. So I said, well, when did I feel on top of my game or feel like it was me? And it was when I was going to Pacifica Graduate Institute, a Jungian place. I felt alive there. I had plenty of energy. Shit, I would drive down there on a Friday night, spend 2 days, drive back Sunday, and go to work as a lawyer. It was great. So I said, so I need to uh, check out this avenue again. So I started reading some books. I started, this feeling lifted. And I says, I'm going to get an analyst. So I started with that and I feel even better. Like, holy cow, this is really it. And then I came to the fact I'm too old, it's too expensive, and it's taking way too much time. And so I thought I was at a restaurant. I just get up and leave. My poor analyst is like, what the hell's going on? He really was involved. And now there's a vacuum. I'm not coming back anymore. I changed my mind. I started getting depressed again. I played this out at least 3 times and maybe 4. And it wasn't until I got off the dime and said, I'm getting in with both feet that, that those feelings lifted. And so that's where I'm at now. So I say if your arm itches, scratch it.
Well, what comes to my mind, thank you so much, is that you all should write. This book is called Who's the Patient Here? Portraits of the Young Psychotherapist. You should write the next version of this, Who's the Patient Here? Portraits of the Old Psychotherapist. And talk about what it's like to undergo this kind of process later in life. Uh, this was early in life, but all three of you are talking. All three that have responded are saying, "I'm older and I have to do this," and I think it's great. And I feel properly chastised for uh, saying you're too old or whatever I said.
You
And
said
I would
it's too much work.
too much work. It is too much work. It is too much work, truly.
I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
I was thinking about the institutional dismemberment. You go through these, all the stuff of becoming an analyst. There's a whole lot of institutional stuff that I think at an older age, I don't think one needs that, but I may be wrong.
Do we know anything about these in Jung's time? Was Jung accepting students or trainings that were uh, in an older age? Because there is not literature about it, right? We know very much about his students or patients from all over the world. I'm reading a book by an Italian writer who is not a Jungian and writes about Christiana Morgensen going back to Kuznach before Jung would die, and so meeting his care Ruth and Aniela Jaffe when she was writing on the memory, dreams, and reflection. But we don't know about Jung entertaining training relationship with someone that is over 60, right? We should ask Sonu to make a research about it.
It's a very interesting question. When I was at Yale Medical School and I met Ray Walker, he was 35 and had been a stockbroker and gone into analysis and decided to become a psychiatrist and then a Jungian. And I thought he was very old at
But
30.
no. But also, I remember when I was 35, 6 when I started my training at the Jung Institute, not a medical school. Of course, medical school is very old, but I remember that I don't know if there is still a minimum age you have to start training, maybe 26, 28. If you're under 26 or 38, they don't consider you because you have to be closer to the second half of your life, which is something bit difficult. And also, I think I think people will not misunderstand me, but there is a big difference in training for a reason that is linked to something in you, in your soul, and training because you have time and money and you need a hobby profession. And this is something that sometimes happens, So there is a big difference in why someone is starting training. I think Dennis wants to ask or has to say something else.
Yeah, my understanding is that Jung did not want a Jung Institute. That was one thought. But going back to something before about the Jungian language and isolating ourselves, and Stefano, you had mentioned the BBC interview, I think, and such an interesting story how Man and His Symbols came about. Freeman, who interviewed Jung, was sent down to Kusnacht to convince Jung to write a book. Jung turned him down. Freeman goes back to London. They persuaded him to go back again. So when Freeman went back the second time, Jung had a dream that he was lecturing to the masses and they were listening intently. So that's why he agreed to write that book. He was interviewed, I think, in 59, died in 61, not in good health. So he wrote the one chapter and farmed the rest out to his most trusted followers, if you will. But so in Jung's mind and by his own dreams, his psychology was for the masses, not just medical students or entomologists.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tom, we are reaching the end of this beautiful, for us, evening, for you, lunchtime retreat. And the floor is yours for your last consideration, comment, complaints, whatever you want to say.
Well, I would say that it's been a real pleasure to talk with you and with the people participating because it's what do I want to say? I just love the contributions from other people. Each of us has our own experience and our own calling and our own way of proceeding. Everybody here has had a different story to tell about a calling. It's really a calling where it's something that they couldn't not do. And maybe that's the reality of the inner world where you get something from inside and there's no way, even if you try to avoid it 3 or 4 times, even if Jung tried to avoid writing Man and His Symbols 3 or 4 times, somehow when a voice from inside and from deep calls one, as much as you may want to refuse it, if it keeps bugging you, you have to do it. If you don't do it, you die, or you wither up, or you become, you lose your vitality. So I really like the participation of the group because everybody really was attesting to that same thing about the reality of an inner calling that can't be denied, or it's denied at one's own peril, including Jung himself, even at the end of his life.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Fantastic words. We will continue next month for the last Psychosocial Wednesday of 2025 on the Jungian analyst. And we will actually talk about the making of a Jungian analyst. And we will have Robin Zager from Israel. So I see you in December. We will, of course, send you the correct information. Tom, as always, thank you so much. I will be happy to hear what do you think of the book, of the new published book, the quality, and to all of you here, buy the book. Don't do it for me, do it for Tom Singer. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.